Here's a stat that should not be possible on television in 2026. A show drops its fifth and final season, and instead of the usual fan letdown, the audience score jumps almost 30 points overnight. That is not a typo. That is The Bear going from a 54% audience score in Season 3 to an 85% score in Season 5. In television years, that is the equivalent of a team going from last place to a championship run in 2 seasons. So today we're going to dig into how The Bear pulled off one of the rare final season redemption arcs in modern TV, what actually changed behind the camera, and why critics are calling this the best ending since Breaking Bad. Stick around, because the way this show fixed itself is genuinely a case study every writer's room should be paying attention to. Let's set the table first. The Bear premiered in 2022 and immediately became one of those shows people could not stop talking about. Season 1 landed a 92% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Season 2 matched it. 100% critics score out of the gate, 99% for Season 2. That is about as close to flawless as a prestige drama gets. Then something happened. Season 3 arrived, and the wheels came off with viewers. That 54% audience score I mentioned is the lowest of the entire series. Season 4 barely recovered, landing at 68%. Critics were kinder during that stretch, giving Season 3 an 89% and Season 4 an 84%, but the gap between what critics loved and what regular viewers tolerated kept widening. That gap is usually a warning sign a show has started making television for other television writers instead of for the people actually watching on their couch. So what went wrong in those middle seasons? If you talk to critics who covered all 5 years, the consensus points to the same handful of problems. The show got obsessed with detours. Entire episodes were handed over to flashbacks, extended family drama, or standalone character studies that pulled focus away from the kitchen. NPR's review of the final season put it bluntly, saying the show had reached a point where you weren't watching The Bear the series anymore. You were watching The Bear the cultural phenomenon. And then there were the cameos. Real-life celebrity chefs kept popping up almost as a checklist item, alongside a string of actor cameos that reviewers said had become distracting rather than fun. One outlet specifically called out a big-name guest appearance in an earlier season as one of the rare missteps in the whole run. When your show is famous for kitchen tension and the sound of tickets printing, and instead you're spending a whole episode on a wedding or a flashback to culinary school in Copenhagen, you start to lose the thing that made people obsessed in the first place. Season 5 figured that out, and the fix is almost stupidly simple once you hear it. Cut the wandering. Go back to the pressure cooker. The entire final season, all 8 episodes, unfolds across a single day. One shift, one dinner service. Creator Christopher Storer actually trimmed the episode count down from the usual 10 to 8, and instead of using that space for side quests, he poured it all into real-time tension. The premise is brutal in the best way. Carmy has just told Sydney and Richie he's stepping back from the restaurant, handing control over to them, right as a massive storm floods Chicago. The ceiling starts collapsing, and the restaurant's main investor has literally run out of money to keep the place open. Everything that could go wrong on the worst possible day does go wrong, all in the space of one dinner rush. Variety's review described it as the show resyncing its style and substance, trading Carmy's abstract inner turmoil for something much more concrete, like Natalie explaining in plain terms why the restaurant can't afford to close during a storm, even though it probably should. That structural choice matters more than it sounds like on paper. When you strip a show back down to one location and one ticking clock, every character has to justify their screen time by doing something in that moment. Sydney isn't sitting around wondering if she's ready to lead anymore. She's actually leading, under the worst circumstances imaginable, and reviewers specifically praised Ayo Edebiri for selling the weight of finally getting the responsibility her character had been chasing since episode 1. Tina and Marcus aren't stuck on the sidelines doing quiet character beats. They're thrown straight into the fire alongside everyone else. Try to stretch a limited food supply into something that still feels like a real dining experience. It's the same trick that made Season 1 so tense in the first place, just executed with 4 more seasons of character history behind it. Now let's talk about the episode everyone is losing their minds over, because this is where it gets interesting from a storytelling perspective. Episode 7 is called Caramel, directed and co-written by Storer himself, and multiple critics flat out said it plays like a complete series finale on its own, even though it technically is not the last episode. The Hollywood Reporter's review said it delivered everything you'd want from an ending, then admitted feeling almost unsettled that an actual 8th episode still existed after that. Consequences Review mentioned a moment involving a candle in that episode that reportedly reduced the critic to tears they couldn't fully explain. That's a strange problem for a show to have, essentially peaking so hard on the second to last episode that critics were nervous about what came next. But by most accounts, the actual finale, titled The Original Beef of Chicagoland, pulls it off anyway, not by escalating the tension further, but by doing the opposite. It slows all the way down. Instead of another crisis, the finale becomes what the Hollywood Reporter's critics called a victory lap, tying up small lingering threads like the identity of the spoon thief that have been a background joke for seasons, while giving every major character a proper send-off. Here's the part one actually find most interesting if you care about how television gets made. This wasn't an accident. Storer has talked openly about the fact that The Bear was never really meant to be a show about restaurants at all. It was always meant to be a show about depression, grief, anxiety, and addiction, using a professional kitchen as the pressure chamber to put those things under a microscope. When the show drifted into style over substance during seasons 3 and 4, it lost sight of that emotional core in favor of visual flourishes and structural experiments. Season 5 works because it goes right back to that original thesis and refuses to get distracted again. Every character's arc in this final stretch ties directly back to what they've been struggling with internally since day one, just resolved through action instead of another therapy session-style monologue. So where does this leave The Bear's overall legacy? Right now, Season 5 sits at a 98% critic score, just shy of those 2 flawless opening seasons, and an 85% audience score that's already being called one of the most satisfying series endings in recent memory. Not every review is glowing. A handful of critics pointed out that even this final season still leans in some of the same tricks that got repetitive in earlier years, and a few viewer reviews online still find certain characters exhausting rather than compelling. But the overwhelming consensus from Rotten Tomatoes Critic Roundup to NPR to Variety is that The Bear did something a lot of prestige shows fail to do. It recognized what wasn't working, stripped it out, and closed the book on its own terms instead of dragging things out for one more underwhelming season. If there's a bigger lesson here for anyone who follows television, it's this. Audiences will forgive a rough middle stretch if the ending actually earns it. The Bear proves that a strong finish doesn't just save a season. It can genuinely reshape how people remember the whole series. Let me know in the comments where you land on this final season, and whether you think it fully makes up for those 2 rough years in the middle. If you want more breakdowns like this on how shows either stick the landing or completely botch it, subscribe because we got a lot more of these coming.